Hello, I'm Anne-Marie Pearman. I'm joined today by Jacqueline Hollows, who is the founder of Beyond Recovery. And Beyond Recovery helps people with addictions, mental health, offending behaviour. She's also authored research papers, and she's currently working on a book about her experiences. She has a YouTube channel called Beyond TV, and she has a running channel called Beyond Running on YouTube, both on YouTube. And she's also doing a crowdfunding campaign at the moment, and I'll be providing the link for that later when I put this onto YouTube. So hello, Jacqueline.
Hello, Anne-Marie, and I'm an author of a book already.
Oh, A Different Story. Yes, I forgot about A Different Story.
Just, you know.
Available through all good bookshops or through Amazon.
Available through Amazon and Ingram Sparks, yeah, and Barnes and Noble.
Oh, that's good. So yes, buy it here, folks. Well, there. So I'd like to start by asking you, Jacqueline, what was your inspiration for going into prisons and founding Beyond Recovery, and how did you find that journey?
Oh, right. So in a way, there wasn't an inspiration. It was like a breadcrumb. So I was in IT before. I was customer services. I was in customer services and IT and operations and things like that. And I came out of that world through redundancy and all sorts of different things, and talked about that on a previous session, which you can see in the that's a little YouTube in joke. Yeah, so I along the journey, when I was in that sort of place of basically, wow, there's other stuff in the world that I haven't experienced, and that I wanted to do something more meaningful. So I'd been working in IT and it really wasn't meaningful at all. So I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And so because of that, I just started volunteering at places and so on. And I met somebody who'd been in prison, and through him, I got involved in the recovery community. So I met lots and lots of people with addictions, and they'd been in prison and they'd had lots of traumas in their life and so on. And I loved them. I thought they were amazing. I kept seeing people being truly amazing, and they didn't really know that they were amazing. And just, I thought that I wanted to do that work, and I knew that I wanted to help, but no one really wanted to pay me for it. So the people that I was working with couldn't afford it, and I wouldn't have expected them to pay. And then the people that could afford it, like addiction agencies and places like that, they didn't want to know, because they've got their set ways of doing things that they believe in, and they didn't want to know about this new paradigm. Plus, back in the day in 2014, I guess that I didn't really know how to talk about it either. So, I would go to meetings in London with, I won't mention their names, but addiction agencies, and they'd just frown at me and think, what's she talking about? Well, how do people change? Well, I don't really know how they change. I just talk to them and they change. And I was very fortunate because I got introduced to somebody at the prison. And I stalked him. So I found out that he was going to an event, and I went to that event and started talking to him and saying, it'd be really good to come along and tell you about this thing that I'm doing. And he said, yeah. And I was sort of a bit shocked by that. And I was doing all sorts of other work at the time. So that included stuff in envelopes, but occasionally people would hire me as like a coach to help them with, they did events, I'd be there coach person that would go around and talk to people. And one day I was at this event, which is in a very posh hotel in Birmingham, and there was all these sort of business people, and we were all dressed up and everything. And then the next day I was sitting in this grubby prison reception area with steel bars, and looked very scary, and you weren't allowed to go through like there's 3 doors and you weren't allowed to go through the doors and things. And I remember sitting there thinking, I want to come and work here. So I never thought I want to work in prisons and made that happen. I really just followed what, you know, one foot in front of the other, and that led to that. So I had an interview with the guy that I'd stalked, and the head of NHS in the prison at the time. And there's a bit of a funny story, actually. I was just writing in my book earlier about this, and I took along with me a guy that I'd been working with from the recovery community, and he'd had years and years of trauma and all sorts of things, and he was really seeing a lot, you know, and feeling a lot more peaceful. And we went, and have I told you this story before? No. We went along, and we went through all these gates, great big gates that had to be locked and unlocked, and they clang as you go through them. And we went to this block, which we later found out it's called the healthcare block, and it's really nice, actually. There's nice seats and a little sink and somewhere for a drink. And I wanted to go to the loo, so I said, "Oh, you know, could I go to the loo?" So we left my colleague in the room with the other person, and the person I was having the meeting with took me to the loo. I'm in the loo, and it was all a bit scary, you know. I was a bit like, this is really prison, like this is really scary. And all the alarms went off. Now, in my mind, and I know now that this isn't true because I've been in there when alarms go off, but in my mind it looked like all these really loud alarms went off, and doors came down, and officers came running around with guns, and it seemed really, really scary. And there was a lot of running about, and somebody banged on the door and they said, "Get back in the room," and there was lots of shuffling about. And so we went back in the room, and the guy that I was meeting with said, when someone presses the panic alarm, basically the whole prison stops, and everyone goes to the rescue. And if they can't sort the problem, then the tornado team come in, you know. So it's a really big deal. And so I was like, oh, okay, you know. So we went back to the room, and my colleague, we'll call him Will. My colleague Will, he said, "You know that big green button on the wall, and there's like a big green panic button?" Yeah. I said, and he said, "Is that the light switch?" And he'd pressed the panic alarm. So obviously the guy that we were meeting went and stood down the tornado team and all of that. And I thought, wow, that's it, we've blown it. You know, basically the first day in prison, and we've pressed the panic alarm and set off all these officers running around. And of course, you know, I was anxious as well. Anyway, we hadn't blown it. And quite by some sort of stroke of mind, the guy that was interviewing me, his name was Scott, he had read a book by Richard Carlson called Stop Thinking and Start Living, and Richard Carlson knew Sid Banks, so he could hear that this was similar to something that he'd read, and he said, I think I know what this is, and so on. But again, he kept saying, well, how does it work, and why do people change? And I didn't really know how to explain all of that. But by the seat of our pants, he decided that he'd give it a go, and he said, oh, you know, come and do a pilot. And another little part to that story, and this is, I tell you this because this is how naive I was. So up until now, I'd been doing it voluntary for 2 years. I'd experienced nobody wanted it. And although I'd run a business before, a project management business. I'd never been in this world, and there's no money in this world. Like, and he said, oh, how much is it? And I just didn't expect him to ask that question for some reason. And I said, oh, 50 quid. And Will, you know, sort of kicked me under the table, but it was out my mouth, you know, and I lived 44 miles away from the prison. So a round trip would probably cost me that much to get there. Anyway, he said, you know, well, we'll do a proposal and we'll do a 12-week program. So I wrote a proposal. I said it was 50 quid a session. So that sort of glossed over that little bit, and then sent it off. And I was, again, another bit of serendipity. He passed that proposal on to the local commissioner, the local council commissioner, and the commissioner really liked it. And he got it because he wrote an email to me, and he sort of understood that people change because they realise that they're the thinker, and that's what he got. And as it happens, there was an underspend in the budget. They'd closed the prison, and they wanted me to do a 12-month pilot. So they came back to say, you know, the mental health team love it, but the psychologists not so much. So could you write a business case? And I said, yeah, of course, yeah. And could you do a 12-month pilot? And then I came off the phone and thought, I wonder what a business case is. So I didn't even know what a business case was. But I researched it and found out what it was. And basically I had to write a big paper that explains how you're going to do, what you're going to do, what resources you need, what research there was. And again, you know, there's lots of luck in this story, lots of hard work and metal, but lots of luck as well. And there wasn't very much research at the time. So some of the OGs that used to like deliver free principles work will openly admit they did not like research, and never really wanted to do it. And in fact, there's some room somewhere with piles and piles of paper that you know, that they did take scores and things, but they never used it. So there was very little research, but I learned a lot by trying to find it, and I actually made a lot of connections by trying to do that. And there's another little side story which I'll just quickly tell you, which is that there's a guy in the community called Jack Pranksky. He's written a few books. One of his books is Somebody Should Have Told Us, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And it was one of the first books that I'd read, and I was really impacted by it. And so I'd gone, he's American, and I'd gone along to London to see him talk and get him to sign my book. And I saw one day on LinkedIn that, which is like a networking platform, that he wanted to turn his book Modelo, which is about a community project that had massively transformed due to the 3 principles, or health realization as it was called then. And he wanted to turn it into a film, and he was looking for a filmmaker, and I knew a filmmaker, so I introduced him to a filmmaker. And then he ended up saying to me, well, I'm coming to England, I'm actually doing a European tour, I could come and see you, which I was totally shocked at, because, you know, I didn't know this guy from Adam, and there he was like, I come and see you. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, you could stay with us if you like. And he went, yes, please. So Dr. Jack Pranksky, you know, turned up in Birmingham one day where we lived, and we went for coffee, and he ended up staying the night. And when he went to his little room, Rob, my fiance at the time, said, oh, and where do you know him from? And I said, well, I don't really. He said, so we've got some strange bloke staying in the spare bedroom. Anyway, later on, when I got the you know, when they asked me to write the prison business case, I got back in touch with Jack and said, oh, guess what, you know, and he said, well, sorry, Derek, you have to hear my terrible accent again. He said, Jacqueline, do you want to put your name on the map? Oh, I said, what do you mean? And he said, make it a research project, because that's what the community need. And so because of him, I then got in touch with another wonderful research lady called Linda Ramus and Tom Kelly, Professor Tom Kelly, and we made that that business case into a research project. And that's how I ended up co-authoring my first research paper, and we've obviously developed 2 more since then. But without all of that happening, you know, when I look now, I think, how did all that happen? You know, there wasn't really, it was never that I went, you know, oh yeah, right, I'm doing this, and I was focused and I got on and did it. I just did what was next in front of me, and what turned up. And I feel that I was guided, you know, each step of the way. And there was lots of hard work, but I was guided each step of the way. So that was is that what you were asking me?
Yes, and how did it go on from there then? Was there sort of a snowball effect where people started to hear more about you and more prisons were contacting you, or did you actually have to go out yourself and contact other prisons?
Yeah, great question. Anyone who works in the criminal justice system will know that it is not an easy place to work. They don't tend to just get in touch with you, and so no, that didn't happen. In the one prison that we were working in HMB Onley, we were very popular. We were popular with the guys. We had an enormous waiting list. There was a really good vibe. Like, the guys used to teach themselves. They, you know, in between classes, they used to talk to each other, and you know, so some of the most impactful stuff that happened between them. But we were also popular with, like, the workshop managers and the officers, a lot of the officers, because, and the other interventions, because they got to see that when people came and came onto our programs, actually the way that the prison people would put it is that they became more self-aware, they became calmer, and they would do better in other stuff. So you know, the substance misuse interventions, for instance, they wanted the guys to do our course first, the Beyond Recovery course first, before they went onto their interventions, because they'd end up doing way better. In fact, the substance misuse team ended up changing a lot of their programs based on what we were doing, and include Sid Banks in one of their programs. They talk about psychological innocence now. So we actually had a systemic impact on that prison and the people in that prison. We did get more work through that. The prison next door, which is a prison for people with sexual offences, was under the same commissioner. So he introduced us there, and we did get some more work there. But all the other prison work that we've got has come from me touting and knocking people's doors and so on. It's not easy work. You don't do this work to get rich and famous. Basically, it's one of our investors calls it God's work. You do it for love, and you know, it has plenty of rich rewards around that.
And how did the prisoners take the workshops that you were delivering?
So when we first started, the prison residents were skeptical, and I've started many a group where I say that, you know, I'd have 15 hairy, scary men in the room, and they just were really confused because it was different. We didn't want them to do anything. There was no structure, there was no lesson plan, they didn't have to write anything, they didn't have to remember anything. we brought biscuits and tea and coffee, so you know they sort of all come along and want to get the biscuits and tea and coffee, and they thought we were naive, but they knew something was happening. So they'd come into group. I mean, some people describe it like you just all had an aura about you, and I wanted some of that. Or they'd come into group and they'd bond with other people, they'd make friends, and then they'd be totally shocked that they'd made friends, you know, and say that never happens. They used to get a bit frustrated about how easy we were with the tea and coffee and stuff, because people used to come and go, oh, can I get a tea? But to me, we were doing little interventions with those people who were stealing the tea, you know, so they'd come and get the tea, and then we'd have a little sprinkle, a little fairy dust. And one of my favorite stories of that was this guy that everyone used to get so annoyed about him. It was on K-Wing, and so some of our groups were held on the actual wing where the men live, and he was a real nuisance in a way. So he always used to come at the start, can I get a coffee, miss? And he always used to get a coffee, and the men in the group would say, don't let him in, don't let, he's using you. And at the end of 2015, we made a film, and sorry, 16, we made a film in 15, but we made another one, and we interviewed the guys, and we were taking them into a little room, and this guy came in, and we had cakes because we wanted to interview them. So he came and he wanted a cake, and I said, well, you can stay if you'll be interviewed and you come onto the group next time. Of course he agreed, and they were all going, no, don't let him, he's never gonna come. Anyway, we did interview him, and he said, let's call him Fred. So Fred said, well, I've got this secret that keeps me up at night, that you definitely couldn't help with. And we were like, yeah, okay, well, we'll help with that. Anything else? And he said, no, you don't understand, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. I'm planning to do a terrible thing, and it keeps me up at night. And I was with Paul Luck, and Paul said, yeah, I'm sure we can help with that. And is there anything else? And he just went on like this, you know, he wouldn't tell us what it was, and we kept saying, yeah, we're going to be able to handle whatever it is, you know, don't be worried about it. Anyway, finished his interview, and he went, and the next week he came, and he said, I'm not staying to class, and I won't take your coffee, but I have to tell you something. So I said, okay, come on, tell me something then. And he said, well, I thought you were absolutely crackers, because you and Paul just kept saying, no, don't worry, we'll handle it. And he said, I went back to my cell, and I thought, they're just mad, those people are. And I was watching a program, and on this program, it was about restorative justice, and a mum forgave the killer of her child. And he said, I was watching this program, this mother forgave the killer of the child, and I started to cry. And I thought, what's going on? What's happening? You know, I'm crying. And he said, and as I was crying, I realized I couldn't do what I've been planning to do. And what had happened, so bit of a trigger warning here, everybody, and the people who were watching afterwards. What had happened was his sister had been brutally attacked and raped, and he knew the perpetrator. And every night he had hatched the plan of what he was going to do to this fellow when he got out. And he told his mom and his sister, and they begged him, you know, to not do it. And he was absolutely determined. And he was in a gang. So there were lots of reasons why he felt he had to do this. And when he watched that program, he knew 100% he couldn't do it. and that if that mother could forgive someone who killed her son, then he had it in his heart to forgive as well. And he said, my mom's so grateful, and she said, you'll be blessed, and my sister's so grateful, and all of these things. And I said, well, what do you think that was then? And he said, I have no idea. I have no idea, but I didn't understand what you did and then why I thought that. And I didn't know at the time either. But since then, what I've talked to people about it, and where I've got to is that we had complete unshaken certainty that there was nothing that couldn't be helped with this understanding. With our absolute confidence that whatever it was that he came up with, we could back into the principles, basically. And that disrupted his normal reality. So, you know, it sort of touched him. And the conversation basically touched his spirit, touched his soul. And that's what he was responding to when he watched the TV. So when he watched the TV, his soul responded to this forgiveness, and then he felt forgiveness, which he'd never even known what forgiveness was. He'd never experienced that. So it was, you know, demonstration of it. It's in the silence. It's within that it happens. And, you know, there are lots and lots of stories like that, transformational stories and things like that. And it wasn't those stories that were popular. It was more that there was this aura of it, and people felt that, and they, you know, we felt so much love in those rooms, and we'd come out laughing and joking, and you know, officers would say, where are you lot going now? You know, you must be all drunk or something, because we'd be so happy. And we've run groups of, you know, 40 odd people in the chapel, and same thing, you know, no difference than 3 people or 40 people. When you drop into a quiet space with people and your soul sees their soul, the change happens, and people feel things that they maybe didn't know that they could feel.
And you mentioned the officers. Did they have any feedback, or did they say anything about how they found the prisoners after they'd been to your workshops?
Yeah, so we had, again, a lot of skepticism, and different people, different reactions. So in the prison for people with sexual offences, they really didn't think the men could change. So they thought, again, they thought we were all a bit crazy, you know, and they sort of didn't really, a lot of them didn't like us very much. But funnily enough, I see some of the team outside now, because I live close to that prison, and individually they will come up to me, and some of them have even come to Mind Spa when we used to run Mind Spas. Individually they'll come up to me and say, oh yeah, you know, and they'll say what they've saw, or they say that so and so has changed. But as a collective, there's an attitude that people can't change, and you have to keep them locked up, and, you know, you have to be horrible to them. But in the other prisons, it was mixed, really. So you get some, you know, die-hard people that think, no, these people are one way and that's it, you know, leopard never changes his spots. But you get other people, many people that I've met in the prison system actually want to go there to help. They want to go there to stop people offending and to help the trauma that people have been through. And so they would be appreciative. And what we try to say is, like, those big transformational moments are very, you know, they're few and far between, aren't they? They're occasional. But people's behaviour changes, you know, gradually. So someone that just came to mind, he used to be in trouble every week, you know, every week he'd be in the block. And the last time we saw him last year, I think he'd had 6 months where he hadn't been in the block. And so the prison itself didn't always notice those little incremental changes, but eventually after time they did. Well, I had officers used to come to the Mind Spa, and I've run a program for officers as well, but it's a bit more, I don't know, like they don't really want people to know that they're doing that. There's a systemic problem and a systemic way of thinking, and that takes a little bit longer to change.
Is it because they're locked in their procedural type of head, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And also they've had years of seeing the worst, so they often only ever get to see the bad things that happen and the people that come back. And there is a them and us, tends to be a them and us between officers and the residents, and so they get the worst end of the deal in a way, and so that makes them a bit jaded. And then also yeah, they get there's lots of rules and procedures, and I think that sometimes that just bogs everything down a little bit. So, you know, they're put in place for good reasons. They don't actually always, you know, fix those reasons, but people will abide by them. So, you know, the toilet roll is a very good example of that. You know, so somebody will want a toilet roll, and because they ask nicely, they won't get a toilet roll. And then there's an app, and they have to put it in an app, you know, so they have to write out a piece of paper and submit that, and then that has to go to somewhere else, and then that goes to HR, and, you know, there's 3 weeks past before this person gets told, no, we can't give you a toilet roll, you know, and that really has happened. And that can happen, you know, it gets stuck in this bureaucratic machine, which actually the people are good at heart, but they've become trapped in this procedural world, and sometimes they don't think outside of the box because they are also under a lot of pressure and very busy as well.
You talking about the toilet roll reminded me of a story I heard about Kettle Food.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about Kettle Food?
Well, the best birthday present I ever had was a risotto made in a kettle. I hope I don't get into trouble for that, but so yeah, the guys get terrible food, and girls. I think it costs £1.50 or £1.25 to feed a person in prison a day. So, like you can imagine, the food isn't very nutritious, and not really allowed to cook. And however, interestingly, on the canteen thing that they can buy spices and rice and mackerel and so on. So they buy all these goods, and then they cook it in a kettle. And the guys have told me about stingers. So, you know, you get some wires and you boil your water by putting the electricity into the water and so on, and they cook rice. And I went in near my birthday, and some of the lads we've been working with for quite some time had made me a risotto, which we ate that evening as my birthday meal. So, and it was very, very tasty, I have to say. Amazing. They're so resilient and they're so creative. What I love about that story is that there you are living in, you know, quite a dark, depressing environment. A tiny small cell where your toilet is next to your bed and your sink, and where you eat, and you've got, you know, probably not very much, and you're living in this noisy place and you're locked up, but you learn to cook and you feed yourself nutritious food like cooking in a kettle. And one of the things that I loved working there was because I kept seeing that, how creative human beings are and how amazingly resilient. Like if they can't have something or do something, they'll find ways of making that happen. And you know, I can't imagine what it must be like to live in a prison cell, and I'm not a brilliant cook, so you know, for people to be able to go, right, yeah, I'll learn to cook and I'll cook in my kettle. And I've even heard that people have made cake, but I just don't know how that would work. But they certainly make hooch at Christmas as well, so perhaps we won't go into that.
And how has Beyond Recovery done through the COVID period as well? And do you know how it's affected the prisoners?
Yeah, so COVID's been very difficult for prison residents. They were during COVID, hooch is like a dog. Yeah. They were locked up for 23 hours a day. It's not just for Christmas, hooch. Very good, Derek. Yeah, they were locked up for 23 hours a day, and which is not funny. And just to put that in context, that's 23 hours a day for the entire time that we were in and out of lockdown. People were stuck in their cells, so they didn't get access to mental health providers, to education, to the library, to faith, to visitors. All of that was taken away from them. And somebody having their liberty taken away is the punishment. You know, that whether or not you agree with that is another subject, but the law is that if you break the law, there's you know, a sentence that a judge can give you, and that is to take your liberty away. It's not to take your human rights away. And I think that's forgotten sometimes. So I think it's affected the whole system really badly. It was closed down. We couldn't go in anymore. So Beyond Recovery's business has completely changed. And I am very concerned about the impact of all of those people coming out back into society with no support and no help and no rehabilitation. And I believe that they're still locked up for long periods of time, even though there's some let up in some prisons. So it's opening up a little bit now, but it's very, very slow. And the other problem that you have in prison is that the technology is non-existent. So you can't Zoom, you can't send in iPads, even secure iPads is really difficult to get in. There was somebody with severe anxiety problems who had a lot of suicidal ideation. I was going to see him every day for a period of time until I got stopped, and I couldn't even get access to call him on a daily basis. So, you know, the sort of services are limited, and so I think it's had a massive effect on the whole system. On Beyond Recovery's end, we just got very creative, and you were involved in this, Anne-Marie, and creating activity books for people, and that turned into a distance learning program and CDs, and for those that can have them, and various things, prison radio shows, and so on. So we pivoted so that we could provide something, and that's been reasonably successful. This is a good segue, you're good at this. Reasonably successful. We had a 19% completion rate for that, which doesn't sound big, but in the system that we're in was good. And we've learned from that. So there's, you know, we need to make our packs more accessible to people with learning differences, for instance, and to younger people. And We want to do more radio shows so that we can be impacting people, even though we're not in there. And, you know, I'd like to read the Missing Link, for instance, and have a Missing Link show on there, and things like that. So there are things that we could do. There's another stage where we want to try and develop some technology, but that's further down the line. But we didn't change in terms of who we want to serve. We just changed in the way that we tried to serve them. So I guess that's the segue into the crowdfunder, and that's why we're running a crowdfunder at the moment, because we've realised that if we could put out more shows and have, you know, families working with the residents at the same time, we can have a bigger impact. So even though they've got less access to other things, there is something that is, you know, supporting them. And it's interesting because you think that the work is done when someone comes out and they're rehabilitated, but the problem is that they often go back to the same community and the same friends. And the families, if you think about the families, they've lived in a life where they've had this roller coaster. Oh, he's out. Oh, he's back. Now he's going back again. Oh, he says he's changed. No, he hasn't changed. And they've lived in that roller coaster. So we want to provide mental health services for them as well. And then that way, when the resident comes out, they're with the family who's also had a shift in understanding. And then that can be a tighter bond, and be more fruitful.
It's coming up to the top of the hour now, so I thought I might open it up, see if other people have any comments or questions they'd like to raise with Jacqueline.
Please.
Sorry.
I've got a question. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri doesn't understand, but I do. That was somebody's Siri, wasn't me. You still with us, Tom?
Yes, of course. First of all, I admire what you do. I'm jealous that you had the opportunity to meet up with Jack Bransky. I know all his books, and as well as books written by Banks, and many other people on this subject. Anyway, I got interested some years ago in this, and certainly it transformed my life when I retired and found myself in a quite deep depression. Actually, I got out of it only thanks to the 3 principles. So that's just a comment. As I said, I use 3 principles now in my work as a coach, and it makes a difference to be able to understand. It's quite easy to understand. It's more difficult to live life according to the 3 principles. And that's really all. As I said to you, it's for those who don't know much about the 3 principles, it's a time to find out. That's easy.
Thank you, Tom.
Welcome.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I only wanted to say thank you, Jacqueline, also for all you do within the prisons, outside the prisons, and the change you make. I know that you get a lot from it yourself, from giving. You receive, don't you? My curiosity was sparked at one of the 3P conferences, listening to you and the boys, and you've made a big difference to me. So thank you, and thank you, boys, to Derek and Oma.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
We're blessed to have you in our lives. You do amazing work in schools, so thank you. You're stopping those young people going to prison. Yeah. You're breaking cover, Derek.
Yeah, I might as well. Yeah, I just want to say, Mama J, yeah, just from that story alone, you can see how much people you impact, and having been impacted firsthand, I know how much good work you've done, and how that story sort of ties in with me and where it could have fallen off, or where you could have taken a left turn at so many opportunities. And yeah, I just love hearing their story every single time, all of them. Just like hearing it fresh every time. But as it's a question time, I'll ask you a question. Now, do you know what? In your story, I see, because I've only ever really seen the good side, where things happen, where good, you impacted me, impact people I know. And that's sort of how I was introduced to your organization and you. But hearing a little bit of the backstory, and it's interesting that you said about the, creativity and resilience that we show. I think this is going to come up in your answer now, probably. You see, like in the early days, did you ever really say, do you know what? What do you do, like project manager? Did you ever think, do you know what? What the hell am I really? I know there's little doubting thoughts that will come in, but did you actually say, do you know what? I need to go project manager. There's some ads in the paper, or did you actually, was that point when you like gave it some serious thought as to what the hell am I doing?
Yeah. And
if you did and didn't go through with it, and I think that's where your creativity and resilience comes through, because that has got to be new to you, innit? But
yeah,
the point when you seriously thought that, like, that is it, kaput sort of thing in the early days.
Often in the early days. So often in the early days, my favourite saying was, I can always get a job in Tesco. so I don't know why Tesco. But yeah, often when things are really tough, and you know, like I don't talk about the tough stuff so much, and the tough stuff always came from the system and not being able to get funding, or the difficulty with the research was so hard to do, and not being appreciated and not being enough, you know. Like there's times, I'm thinking of times when you know, I was with the girls and we'd go in and we just couldn't see enough people that needed help, and I'd feel like, you know, it wasn't enough. So there were plenty of times when I just thought, what am I doing? And what's always brought me back is I bump into someone and they'll say, oh, miss, you changed my life. I was drinking and I didn't have any chance, but now I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And, you know, and the amount of times that happened, and that was it, you know. Somebody say that and you're just like, oh, you just got to carry on, haven't you? So the system and the way it all works, I give it up tomorrow. But the people, no, I could never give up. So yeah, it's a really good question. I watched a video once about Steve Jobs, and he said, do what you love, because if you do what you love, you get through the hard times. If you don't love what you're doing, you just give up. And that's how I feel, is that I loved the people and they were what mattered. And so no matter how hard the rest of it was, I never really wanted to give up. And now, even though we're not in prison, I still get the same response from the people that I work with, and letters, and, you know, I write for the prison newspaper, and when I get a letter from someone saying, a recent letter where he says that he wanted me to know about an act of kindness, because I mentioned act of kindness in my story, and he wanted me to know about an act of kindness. And then he asked me, can you help me with my purpose? And he's a 50-year-old man serving a six-year sentence. And then I think, well, you can never stop, really. So, you know, yeah, absolutely. Great question.
I just wanted to jump in on that. You've changed my life, as you know. Yeah, it's been huge, you know, the last 15 months, what you've done for me and showing me, you know, what I've got inside of me to then obviously go off and show the rest of the world. But yeah, I can't thank you enough, Mama. Yeah, I haven't been to prison, but yeah, what you've done for me is huge. So love you lots.
Aww.
Is it my turn? Might as well be, yeah. Actually, Jacqueline, last time you were speaking there before Peter, you touched on something that I was going to ask you, because I have this, my background going back is with alcoholism and depression. That's my problem background, right? Now, it was I was doing some research on, well, I was looking for on behalf of someone else. I was looking for something to do with what was it, anxiety, and I found Jenny. So I says, look, I sent them a link to that video. And in that video, Jenny said, you know, the talk was about, what was it? Forget the exact words, but getting away from anxiety. That wasn't the exact words, but, and it just kind of reminds me, just when I think about that, I can never fully get away from, you know, there are times when I'm writing in my blog, and, you know, I'm doing whatever it is that I feel led to do, which is not a lot. No, I would like to do more, but as just things, the way things are at the moment, and so I can work for weeks, and everything's fine, and I'm getting on, and then suddenly it's like it goes. And, you know, okay, I know, like, take one day at a time, but I just go into these slumps. I don't know, is there a question in here somewhere? How do you keep going? Because you've just talked about you just keep going. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. It was a question on my mind. How do you keep going?
I'll answer what came into my mind then, Xander, for you, and thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable and sharing that. Is beautiful. Really appreciate that, because that alone will help a lot of people, the fact that you just shared that. So that's beautiful. And what occurred to me then, and forgive me for this, it's like, so what? So what you get anxious? So what I find the system hard? Really, you know, in the scheme of things. So what if you think about your life before and your life now? So what you experience anxiety sometimes. If you were to consider that so what, do you think that would be helpful to you?
I don't suffer anxiety myself. I go into these slumps where for days on end I will feel in a low mood. So it's like harkens back to my days of depression. I've been off drink for quite a lot of years now, but I do still. I used to say I'm prone to depression. And I stopped saying that, because no, why would I say that? Why would I say I'm prone to depression? You know, but no, I get these low moods, and they're natural. And yeah, so what?
So what?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, if we don't take it so seriously, we can just ride it. That's how you keep going. You just ride it when you're in it, and it's so what, and it will pass, and we know that, and we have these expectations that it should pass quicker, or we shouldn't go so low, but they're just made up rules. And the depression or anxiety or overwhelm, which is, you know, my favorite little creature that comes into my head, so what? It'll pass in its own time. And if I'm not so keen to make it do what I want it to do, it won't impact me as much.
Mhm.
Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else got anything?
Oh, and Xander, go to Peter's Natter Lounge. Yeah, it's on at 6:30 every Thursday after Anne-Marie's thing. So I highly recommend it. Pete, put your link in the thing if you've got time.
Yeah, I'll have to try and find it too.
Do you want me to put the link on the YouTube thing as well, Pete, as we were talking about it?
Yeah, can do if you wouldn't mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, Anne-Marie.
No, I was just going to say, it doesn't seem to be anything from anybody else. So I was just going to call it. So yeah, preempting you.
Thank you all so much. It was so nice to spend time with you. Lots of love. Xander, grab the link before we leave, though.
Yes.
Yeah, Anne-Marie closes it.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Bye, Gary. Bye, Marley. Bye,
Everybody.
Derek. Bye, Tom.
Bye.
Bye, Xander.
Like the Waltons.
Thank you.
Bye, Jim Bob.
Bye, Anne-Marie.
Bye.
Aww.